Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. It's time to start. Time to start. The 7th plenary meeting of the General Assembly is called to order. Not moving. Okay. Before proceeding to the general debate, the General Assembly will hear an introduction by the Secretary General of his annual report on the work of the organization, issued as document A/79/1 under agenda item 111 in accordance with resolution 51/241. I now give the floor to the Secretary General of the United Nations, His Excellency Antonio Guterres.
Mr. President of the General Assembly, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, our world is in a whirlwind. We are in an era of epic transformation, facing challenges unlike any we have ever seen, challenges that demand global solutions. Yet, geopolitical divisions keep deepening. The planet keeps heating. Wars rage with no clue how they will end. And nuclear posturing and new weapons cast a dark shadow. We are edging towards the unimaginable, a power keg that risks engulfing the world. Meanwhile, 2024 is the year that half of humanity goes to the poles, and half of humanity will be affected. I stand before you in this whirlwind, convinced of two overriding truths. First, the state of our world is unsustainable. We can't go on like this. And second, the challenges we face are solvable. But that requires us to make sure the mechanisms of international problem solving actually solve problems. The Summit of the Future was a first step, but we have a long way to go. And getting there requires confronting three major drivers of unsustainability. A world of impunity, where violations and abuses threaten the very foundation of international law and UN Charter. A world of inequality, where injustices and grievances threaten to undermine countries or even push them over the edge. And a world of uncertainty, where unmanaged global risks threaten our future in unknowable ways. These worlds of impunity, inequality, and uncertainty are connected and colliding. Excellencies, the level of impunity in the world is politically indefensible and morally intolerable. Today, a growing number of governments and others feel entitled to get out of jail free card. They can trample international law. They can violate the United Nations Charter. They can turn a blind eye to international human rights conventions or the decisions of international courts. They can thumb their nose at international humanitarian law. They can invade another country, lay waste to whole societies, or utterly disregard the welfare of their own people. And nothing will happen. We see this age of impunity everywhere, in the Middle East, in the heart of Europe, in the Horn of Africa, and beyond. The war in Ukraine is spreading with no signs of letting up. Civilians are paying the price in rising death tolls and shattered lives and communities. It is time for a just peace based on the UN Charter, on international law, and on UN resolutions. Meanwhile, Gaza is a non-stop nightmare that threatens to take the entire region with it. Look no further than Lebanon. We should all be alarmed by the escalation. Lebanon is at the brink. The people of Lebanon, the people of Israel, and the people of the world cannot afford Lebanon to become another Gaza. Let's be clear. Nothing can justify the abhorrent acts of terror committed by Hamas on October 7th or the taking of hostages, both of which I have repeatedly condemned. And nothing can justify the collective punishment of the Palestinian people. The speed and scale of the The speed and scale of the killing and destruction in Gaza are unlike anything in my years as Secretary General. More than 200 of our own staff have been killed, many with their families. And yet, the women and men of the United Nations continue to deliver humanitarian aid. And I know you join me in paying a special tribute to UNRWA and to all humanitarians in Gaza. The international community must mobilize for an immediate ceasefire, the immediate and unconditional release of hostages, and the beginning of an irreversible process towards a two-state solution. For those who go on undermining that goal with more settlements, more land grabs, more incitement, I ask, what is the alternative? How could the world accept a one state in which a large number of Palestinians would be included without any freedom, any rights, or dignity? In Sudan, a brutal power struggle has unleashed horrific violence, including widespread rape and sexual assaults. A humanitarian catastrophe is unfolding as famine spreads. Yet outside powers continue to interfere with no unified approach to finding peace. In the Sahel, the dramatic and rapid expansion of the terrorist threat requires a joint approach rooted in solidarity. But regional and international cooperation have broken down. From Myanmar to the Democratic Republic of the Congo, to Haiti, to Yemen and beyond, we continue to see appalling levels of violence and human suffering in the face of a chronic failure to find solutions. Meanwhile, our peacekeeping missions are too often operating in areas where simply there is no peace to keep. Instability in many places around the world is a byproduct of instability in power relations and geopolitical divides. For all its perils, the Cold War had rules. There were hotlines, red lines, and guardrails. It can feel as though we don't have that today, and nor do we have a unipolar world. We are moving to a multipolar world, but we are not yet there yet. We are in a purgatory of polarity. And in this purgatory, more and more countries are filling the spaces of geopolitical divides, doing whatever they want with no accountability. That is why it is more important than ever to reaffirm the Charter, to respect international law, to support and implement decisions of international courts, and to reinforce human rights in the world, anywhere and everywhere.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, rising inequalities are a second driver of unsustainability and a stain on our collective conscience. Inequality is not a technical or bureaucratic issue. At its heart, inequality is a question of power with historic roots. Conflict, climate upheaval, and the cost of living crisis are pushing those roots even deeper. At the same time, the world has not recovered from the surge in inequalities caused by the pandemic. Of the world's poorest 75 countries, 1/3 are worse off today than they were 5 years ago. During that same period, the 5 richest men in the world have more than doubled their wealth. And the top 1% of people on Earth own 43% of all global financial assets. At the national level, some governments are supercharging inequalities by doling out massive tax giveaways to corporations and the ultra-rich, while shortchanging investments in health, education, and social protection. No one is being more shortchanged than the world's women and girls. Excellencies, rampant gender-based discrimination and abuse are the most prevalent inequality across all societies. Every day, it seems that we are confronted by yet more sickening cases of femicide, gender-based violence, and mass rape, both in peacetime and as a weapon of war. In some countries, laws are being used to threaten reproductive health and rights. And in Afghanistan, laws are being used to lock in the systematic oppression of women and girls. And I am sorry to observe that despite years of talk, gender inequality is on full display. Please forgive me, it's on full display in this hall as well. Less than 10% of speakers during this week's general debate architecture. Over the past 8 decades, the global economy has grown and transformed. The Bretton Woods institutions have not kept pace. They can no longer provide a global safety net or offer developing countries the level of support that they need. In the world's poorest countries, the debt interest payments now cost more on average than investments in education, health, and infrastructure combined. And around the world, more than 80% of Sustainable Development Goal targets are off track. Excellencies, getting back on track requires a surge of financing for the 2030 Agenda and the Paris Agreement. That means that G20 countries need to lead on an SDG stimulus of $500 billion a year. It means reforms to substantially increase the lending capacity of multilateral development banks and to enable them to massively scale up affordable long-term climate and development finance. It means expanding contingency financing through recycling of special drawing rights. And it means promoting long-term debt restructuring. Excellencies, I have no illusions about the obstacles to reform of the multilateral system. Those with political and economic power, or those who believe they have that power, are always reluctant to change. But the status quo is already draining their power. Without reform, fragmentation is inevitable, and global institutions will become less legitimate, less credible, and less effective.
Excellencies, the third driver of our unsustainable world is uncertainty. The ground is shifting under our feet. Anxiety levels are off the charts, and young people in particular are counting on us and seeking solutions. Uncertainty is compounded by two existential threats: the climate crisis and the rapid advance of technology, in particular artificial intelligence. Excellencies, we are in a climate meltdown. Extreme temperatures, raging fires, droughts, and epic floods are not natural disasters. They are human disasters, increasingly fueled by fossil fuels. No country is spared. But the poorest and most vulnerable are hardest hit. Climate hazards are blowing a hole through the budgets of many African countries, costing up to 5% of GDP every year. And this is just the start. We are on course to careen past the global limit of a 1.5-degree temperature rise. But as the problem gets worse, solutions are getting better. Renewable prices are plummeting, rollout is accelerating, and lives are being transformed by affordable, accessible, clean energy. Renewables don't just generate power, they generate jobs, wealth, energy security, and a path out of poverty for millions. But developing countries cannot be plundered in that journey. Our panel on critical minerals has recommended fair and sustainable ways to meet global demand for these resources, which are essential to the renewables revolution. Excellencies, a future without fossil fuel is certain. A fair and fast transition is not. That is in your hands. By next year, every country must produce an ambitious new national climate action plan or national determined contributions. And this must bring national energy strategies, sustainable development priorities, and climate ambitions together. They must align with 1.5-degree limit, cover the whole economy, and contribute to every one of the COP28 energy transition targets. An International Energy Agency report released today breaks this down. By 2035, on average, advanced economies must slash energy emissions 80% and the emerging markets 65%. The G20 is responsible for 80% of total emissions. They must lead the charge, keeping with the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities in the light of different national circumstances. But these must be done with a joint effort, pooling resources, scientific capacities, and proven and affordable technologies for all to be able to reach those targets. I'm honored to be working closely with President Lula of Brazil, who is both G20 chair and COP30 host, to secure maximum ambition, acceleration, and cooperation. We just met for that purpose. Finance is essential. COP29 is around the corner. It must deliver a significant new finance goal. And we also need a loss and damage fund that meets the scale of the challenge and developed countries meeting their adaptation finance promises. And we must finally flip the script on a crazy situation. We continue to reward polluters to wreck our planet. The fossil fuel industry continues to pocket massive profits and subsidies, while everyday people bear the costs of climate catastrophe, from rising insurance premiums to lost livelihoods. I call on G20 countries to shift money from fossil fuel subsidies and investments to a just energy transition, to put an effective price on carbon, and to implement new and innovative sources of financing, including solidarity levies on fossil fuel extraction through legally binding, transparent mechanisms. All by next year, and this taking into account that those who shoulder the blame must foot the bill. Polluters must pay. Excellencies, the rapid rise of new technologies poses another unpredictable existential risk. Artificial intelligence will change virtually everything we know, from work, education, and communication to culture and politics. We know AI is rapidly advancing, but where is it taking us? To more freedom or more conflict? To a more sustainable world or greater inequality? To being better informed or easier to manipulate? A handful of companies and even individuals have already amassed enormous power over the development of AI with little accountability or oversight for the moment. Without a global approach to its management, artificial intelligence could lead to artificial divisions across the board. A great fracture with two internets, two markets, two economies, with every country forced to pick a side and enormous consequences for all. The United Nations is the universal platform for dialogue and consensus. It is uniquely placed to promote cooperation on AI based on the values of the Charter and international law. The global debate happens here, or it does not happen. And I welcome important first steps. 2 resolutions in the General Assembly, the Global Digital Compact, and the recommendations of the high-level body on AI can lay the foundations for inclusive governance of AI. Let's move forward together to make AI a force for good. Excellencies, nothing lasts forever. But the feature of human life is that it appears otherwise. The current order always feels fixed until it is not. Across human history, we see empires rising and falling, old certainties crumbling, tectonic shifts in global affairs. Today, our course is unsustainable. It is in all our interests to manage the epic transformations underway, to choose the future we want, and to guide our world towards it. Many have said that the divisions and differences today are just too great, that it is impossible for us to come together for the common good. You proved that is not true. The Summit of the Future showed that with a spirit of dialogue and compromise, we can join forces to steer our world to a more sustainable path. It is not the end. It is the start of a journey, a compass in the whirlwind. Let's keep going. Let's move our world towards less impunity and more accountability, less inequality and more justice, less uncertainty and more opportunity. The people of the world are looking to us, and succeeding generations will look back on us. Let them find us on the side of the United Nations Charter, on the side of our shared values and principles, and on the right side of history. And I thank you.
I thank the Secretary General. The Assembly will now turn to agenda item 8, entitled General Debate. Excellencies, heads of state and government, Your Excellency Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, honorable ministers, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I extend a heartfelt welcome to the delegations from member states, observers, and esteemed guests. It is my profound honor and privilege to welcome you to this august hall for the general debate of the 79th session of the General Assembly. Before I proceed, I would like to recognize the presence here today of 9 of my predecessors, past presidents of the General Assembly. Although barely 2 weeks in the job, I can already appreciate the challenges they navigated through. The general debate remains one of the world's most inclusive, representative, and authoritative platforms for global reflection and collective action. This year, the urgency of our task cannot be overstated. We are falling behind in our pursuit of the Sustainable Development Goals. I am informed that with just 5 years to go, less than 18% of the goals have been achieved. Also, the climate crisis is no longer a distant threat. It is here now, ravaging ecosystems and dismantling the livelihoods of entire communities. Conflicts rage from the Middle East to Ukraine, from Haiti to South Sudan, leaving in their wake death, destruction, and immense suffering. I call for an immediate ceasefire in all these conflict settings. For almost a year now, the people of Gaza and Israel have been caught in a spiraling cycle of conflict and retribution. I take this opportunity to call for an immediate ceasefire for the Hamas-Israel war, the unconditional release of hostages, and for all parties to abide by international law, including international humanitarian law, and work towards a just and lasting solution grounded in the United Nations Charter, relevant resolutions, and international law ensuring dignity for both Palestinians and Israelis. Indeed, only a two-state solution can end the cycle of violence and instability, ensuring peace, security, and dignity for both Palestinians and Israelis. Excellencies, we should be coming together for peace and the well-being of our citizens. We should not divert essential resources into military stockpiles, fueling an arms race never before seen since the Cold War era. Nuclear weapons continue to be a threat to humanity and to our planet. A nuclear war must never be fought. Conditions for their use or accidental explosion must always be avoided. We call for urgent measures for the abolition of these tools of the annihilation of the human race and our environment. Old hatreds rooted in prejudice and ignorance persist, and new divisions arise where none should exist. In the recent past, mistrust among states has grown steadily, complicating prospects for peaceful settlement of interstate disputes. It is time to invest more in building trust and practicing dialogue. Constant dialogue is a powerful weapon for all governments have in their hands. Trust and dialogue are integral parts of our human dignity and precondition for lasting peace and security. Excellencies, gender equality remains a distant goal as many women and girls around the world continue to be denied their basic rights, justice, and opportunities. Globally, we witness a troubling regression in the protection of human rights and human dignity. Millions remain trapped in poverty, their lives restricted by forces beyond their control. Forced labor and modern slavery, extending even to young boys and girls of school age, are an insult to human dignity. They must be combated in every society at all times. Excellencies, there is an urgent need to reform the international financial system as too many countries remain burdened by crippling debt, forced to choose between servicing loans and improving the lives of their citizens. Meanwhile, the digital divide continues to widen, cutting off entire populations from the tools needed to succeed in the 21st century. Excellencies, we are not mere spectators of these crises, nor are we powerless to act. Within this hall are the leaders and representatives of the world's nations, the very people with the authority and responsibility to shape the course of our shared future. At our disposal is one of the most powerful tools for positive change: international cooperation grounded in the undeniable truth that even the most powerful nation cannot solve these complex borderless challenges alone. This truth was reaffirmed through our efforts at the Summit of the Future and the consensus adoption of the Pact of the Future. The Pact of the Future charts a path forward, reinvigorating our multilateral institutions with renewed energy, focus, and clarity to meet the demands of a rapidly changing world. Let us build on this momentum. Excellencies, a better world begins with unlocking the potential of we, the peoples of the world. Freedom and good governance ensure that no one, no individual, no community is left behind. In this endeavor, we must never overlook the challenges faced by the small island developing states, the landlocked developing states, the least developing countries, and the small states. It is incumbent on the United Nations to do more than just express solidarity. Specific programs responding to the unique situations in which these groups of states find themselves must be envisaged. This will be a priority of my presidency. Africa is one of the priorities of the United Nations. We must support Africa. The African Union's Agenda 2063 presents a bold and transformative vision for the continent. Africa currently has the youngest population in the world, and by 2063, 1 in 4 people will be African. The generation of resources for the well-being of these peoples has been much slower than the population growth. We must not let Africa's potential go unrealized. In fact, to truly unlock Africa's vast potential, we must actively cultivate global partnerships that align with the continent's aspirations and drive its success. In this endeavor, I look forward to working with member states of the United Nations this year on keeping Africa at the heart of our agenda. Excellencies, in this 79th session, I also want to prioritize multilingualism as a recognition of our world's cultural and linguistic richness. We understand that the multitude of languages, cultures, and perspectives should not be viewed as a source of division, but as a wellspring of strength. Excellencies, we anticipate a very successful high-level week. In addition to the recently concluded Summit of the Future and this ongoing general debate, several critical high-level events are expected to take place. These include the high-level event on microbial resistance, the high-level meeting on addressing the existential threats posed by sea level rise, and the high-level plenary meeting to commemorate and promote the International Day for the Total Elimination of Nuclear Weapons. Throughout the 79th session, we will address the urgent issues of our time. While we may not agree on every issue, we all share the same fundamental goal: to build a better world for everyone, everywhere. Here today are representatives from 193 member states, each embodying our collective aspirations, each guided by a shared vision. The path ahead is difficult, fraught with obstacles that may at times seem insurmountable, but they are not impassable. We have the tools, the knowledge, and the collective will to overcome these challenges if we act together with courage and conviction. Thank you. Before giving the floor to the first speaker for this morning, I would like to remind members that the list of speakers for the general debate has been established on the agreed basis that statements should be no longer than 15 minutes to enable all the speakers to be heard at a given meeting. Within this time frame, I would like to appeal to speakers to deliver the statements at a reasonable pace so that interpretation into other official United Nations languages may be provided properly. I would also like to draw your attention to the decision taken by the General Assembly at previous sessions, namely, that the practice of expressing congratulations inside the General Assembly Hall after a speech has been delivered is strongly discouraged. After delivering the statements from the rostrum, speakers are invited to exit the General Assembly Hall through room GA 200, located behind the podium, before returning to their seats. May I take it that the General Assembly agrees to proceed in this manner? It is so decided. Finally, I should like to draw the attention of members that during the general debate, official photographs of all the speakers are taken by the Department of Global Communications. Members interested in obtaining these photographs are requested to contact the Photo Library of the United Nations. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Luis Inácio Lula da Silva, President of the Federative Republic of Brazil. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Meus cumprimentos
My greetings to the President of the General Assembly, Mr. Yang. I would like to greet the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, and each of the heads of state and government and delegates present. I'd like to address specifically to the Palestinian delegation who is taking part in this opening session for the first time, a bit as an observer member. I'd like to also mention President Abbas attending this meeting. Ladies and gentlemen, the day before yesterday, here in this very plenary, we adopted the Pact for the Future. Its difficult approval shows the weakening of our collective capacity for negotiation and dialogue. Its limited scope is also an expression of the paradox of our time. We walk around in circles between possible commitments that lead to insufficient results. Not even with the tragedy of COVID-19 were we able to unite around a treaty on pandemics at the World Health Organization. We need to go much further and provide the UN with the necessary means to face the dizzying changes in the international panorama. We are living in a time of growing anguish, frustration, tension, and fear. We are witnessing an alarming escalation of geopolitical disputes and strategic rivalries. 2023 holds the sad record of the highest number of conflicts since World War II. Global military spending grew for the 9th consecutive year and reached $2.4 trillion. Over $90 billion have been mobilized with nuclear arsenals. These resources could have been used to finance the fight against hunger and climate change. What we are seeing is an increase in military capabilities. The use of force not supported by international law is becoming the rule. We are witnessing two simultaneous conflicts with the potential to become widespread conflagrations. In Ukraine, with regret, we are seeing the war extending without any prospect of peace. Brazil has firmly condemned the invasion of the Ukrainian territory. It is already clear that neither side will be able to achieve all their objectives through military means. The use of increasingly destructive weapons brings to the mind the darkest days of this sterile Cold War confrontation. Creating conditions for resuming direct dialogue between the parties is crucial at this time. This is a message of the 6 points of understanding that China and Brazil offer for a process of dialogue to be established and for the hostilities to end. In Gaza and the West Bank, we are witnessing one of the greatest humanitarian crises in recent history, which is now spreading dangerously to Lebanon. What began as a terrorist action by fanatics against innocent Israeli civilians has become a collective punishment for the entire Palestinian people. There have been over 40,000 fatal victims, mostly women and children. The right to defense has become the right to vengeance, which prevents an agreement for the release of hostages and postpones the ceasefire. Forgotten conflicts in Sudan and Yemen are causing excruciating suffering to nearly 30 million people. This year, the number of people in need of humanitarian aid in the world will reach 300 million. In times of increasing polarization, expressions such as deglobalization and decoupling have become commonplace, but it is impossible to deplanetize our life together. We're doomed to climate change interdependence. The planet is no longer waiting to demand payment for the next generation and is fed up with unfulfilled climate agreements. It is tired of neglected carbon reduction targets and financial aid to poor countries that does not arrive. Denialism succumbs to evidence of global warming. 2024 is on track to be the hottest year in modern history. Hurricanes in the Caribbean, typhoons in Asia, droughts and floods in Africa, torrential rains in Europe leave a trail of death and destruction. In the south of Brazil, we had the biggest flood since 1941. The Amazon is experiencing the worst drought in 45 years. The forest fires have spread across the country and have already devoured 5 million hectares in August alone. My government does not outsource responsibilities, nor does it abdicate its sovereignty. We have done already a lot, but we know that much more needs to be done. In addition to facing the challenge of climate crisis, we're fighting against those who profit with environmental degradation. We will not tolerate environmental crimes, illegal mining, and organized crime. We reduced the deforestation of the Amazon by 50% in the last year, and we will eradicate it by 2030. It is no longer acceptable to think about solutions for tropical forests without listening to the indigenous peoples, traditional communities, and all those that live in them. Our sustainable development vision is based on the potential of the bioeconomy. Brazil will host COP30 in 2025, convinced that multilateralism is the only way to overcome the climate emergency. Our nationally determined contribution, NDC, will be presented later this year, in line with the goal of limiting the increase of the planet's temperature to 1.5 degrees. Brazil stands out as a source of opportunities in this world revolutionized by energy transition. Today, we are one of the countries with the cleanest energy mix. 90% of our electricity comes from renewable sources, such as biomass, hydroelectrical power, solar power, and wind power. We made the choice for biofuels 50 years ago, long before the discussion about alternative energies gained traction. We are the forefront of other important niches, such as green hydrogen production. It is time to face the debate about the slow pace of the planet's decarbonization and work for an economy less reliant on fossil fuels. Mr. President, Latin America has been experienced since a second lost decade since 2014. The region's average growth during this period was only just 0.9%, less than half of what was seen in the lost decade of the 80s. This combination of low growth and high levels of inequality results in harmful effects on the political landscape. Engulfed by disputes often unrelated to the region, our vocation for cooperation and understanding has been weakened. It is unjustified keeping Cuba on a unilateral list of states that allegedly promote terrorism. And also that this is undue, it reaches the most vulnerable countries. In Haiti, it's urgent to combine actions to restore public order and promote development. In Brazil, defending democracy implies impermanent action against extremist, messianic, and totalitarian attacks, which spread hatred, intolerance, and resentment. It was on its behalf that Brazilians defeated dictators and tyrants who tried to undermine institutions and put them at the service of reactionary interests. Democracy needs to respond to the legitimate aspiration of those who no longer accept hunger, inequality, unemployment, and violence. In a globalized world, it makes no sense to resort to false patriots and isolationists, nor is there hope in resorting to ultra-liberal experiments that only worsen the difficulties of an impoverished continent. The future of our region depends, above all, on building a sustainable, efficient, and inclusive state that tackles all forms of discrimination. A future which is not intimidated by individuals, corporations, or digital platforms that consider themselves above the law. Freedom is the first victim of a world with no rules. Essential elements of sovereignty includes the right to prescribe laws, adjudicate disputes, and enforce rules within one's territory, including the digital environment. The state we are building is sensitive to the needs of the most vulnerable without giving up sound macroeconomic foundations. The false opposition between state and market
forte regulação da economia doméstica. Na área da inteligência artificial, vivenciamos a consolidação de assimetrias que levam a um verdadeiro oligopólio do saber. Avança a concentração sem precedentes na mão de pequeno número de pessoas e de empresas sediadas em um número ainda menor de países. Interessa-nos uma inteligência artificial emancipadora, que também tem a cara do sul global e que fortaleça a diversidade cultural, que respeite os direitos humanos, proteja dados pessoais e promova a integridade da informação. E, sobretudo, que seja ferramenta para a paz, não para a guerra. Necessitamos de uma governança intergovernamental da inteligência artificial, em que todos os estados tenham assento. Senhor presidente, as condições para acesso a recursos financeiros seguem proibitivas para a maioria dos países de renda baixa e média. O fardo da dívida limita o espaço fiscal para investir em saúde, educação, reduzir as desigualdades e enfrentar a mudança do clima. Países da África tomam empréstimo a taxas até 8 vezes maiores que a Alemanha e 4 vezes maior do que os Estados Unidos. É um plano Marshall às avessas, em que os mais pobres financiam os mais ricos. Sem maior participação dos países em desenvolvimento na direção do FMI e do Banco Mundial, não haverá mudança efetiva. Enquanto os objetivos do desenvolvimento sustentável ficam para trás, As 150 maiores empresas do mundo obtiveram juntas um lucro de 1 trilhão e 800 bilhões de dólares nos últimos 2 anos. A fortuna dos 5 principais bilionários mais que dobrou desde o início dessa década, ao passo que 60% da humanidade ficou mais pobre. Os super ricos pagam proporcionalmente muito menos impostos do que a classe trabalhadora. Para corrigir essa anomalia, o Brasil tem insistido na cooperação internacional para desenvolver padrões mínimos de tributação global. Os dados divulgados há 2 meses pela FAO sobre o estado da insegurança alimentar no mundo são estarrecedores. O número de pessoas passando fome ao redor do planeta aumentou em mais de 152 milhões desde 2019. Isso significa que 9% da população mundial, 733 milhões de pessoas, estão subnutridas. O problema é especialmente grave na África e na Ásia, mas ele também persiste em partes da América Latina. Mulheres e meninas são as vítimas maiores de pessoas em situação de fome no mundo. Pandemias, conflitos armados, eventos climáticos de subsídios agrícolas dos países ricos ampliam o alcance deste flagelo. Mas a fome não é resultado apenas de fatores externos. Ela decorre, sobretudo, de escolhas políticas. Hoje, o mundo produz alimentos mais do que suficiente para erradicá-la. O que falta é criar condições de acesso aos alimentos. Esse é o compromisso mais urgente do meu governo. Acabar com a fome no Brasil, como fizemos em 2014. Só em 2023, retiramos 24 milhões e 400 mil pessoas da condição de insegurança alimentar severa. A Aliança Global contra a Fome e a Pobreza, que lançaremos no Rio de Janeiro, em novembro, nasce dessa vontade política e desse espírito de solidariedade. Ela será um dos principais resultados da presidência brasileira do G20 e está aberta a todos os países do mundo. Todos os que queiram se somar a esse esforço coletivo serão muito bem-vindos. Senhor presidente, senhoras e senhores, prestes a completar 80 anos, a Carta das Nações Unidas nunca passou por uma reforma abrangente. Apenas 4 emendas foram aprovadas, todas elas entre 1965 e 1973. A versão atual da Carta não trata de alguns dos desafios mais prementes da humanidade. Na fundação da ONU, éramos 51 países. Hoje, somos 193. Várias nações, principalmente no continente africano, estavam sob domínio colonial e não tiveram voz sobre seus objetivos e funcionamento. Inexiste equilíbrio de gênero no exercício das mais altas funções. O cargo de secretário-geral jamais foi ocupado por uma mulher. Estamos chegando ao final do primeiro quarto do século XXI, com as Nações Unidas cada vez mais esvaziada e paralisada. É hora de reagir com vigor a essa situação, restituindo à organização as prerrogativas que decorrem da sua condição de Fórum Universal. Não bastam ajustes pontuais. Precisamos contemplar uma ampla revisão da Carta. Sua reforma deve compreender os seguintes objetivos: a transformação do Conselho Econômico e Social no principal fórum para o tratamento do desenvolvimento sustentável e do combate à mudança climática, com capacidade real de inspirar as instituições financeiras. A revitalização do papel da Assembleia Geral, inclusive em temas de paz e segurança internacionais. O fortalecimento da Comissão de Consolidação da Paz. A reforma do Conselho de Segurança, com foco em sua composição, método de trabalho, direito de veto, de modo a torná-la mais eficaz e representativa das realidades contemporâneas. A exclusão da América Latina e da África de assentos permanentes no Conselho de Segurança é um eco inaceitável de práticas de dominação do passado colonial. Vamos promover essa discussão de forma transparente. Vamos promover essa discussão de forma transparente, em consulta no G77, no G20, nos BRICS, na CELAC, no CARICOM e tantos outros espaços que existem para discutir. Não tem ilusões sobre a complexidade de uma reforma como essa, que enfrentará interesses cristalizados de manutenção do status quo. Exigirá enorme esforço de negociação, mas essa é a nossa responsabilidade. Não podemos esperar por outra tragédia mundial, como a Segunda Grande Guerra, para só então construir sobre seus escombros uma nova governança global. A vontade da maioria pode persuadir os que se apegam às expressões cruas dos mecanismos de poder. Neste plenário, ecoam as aspirações de toda a humanidade. Aqui, travamos os grandes debates do mundo. Neste fórum, buscamos as respostas para os problemas que afligem o planeta. Recai sobre a Assembleia Geral, expressão maior do multilateralismo, a missão de pavimentar o caminho para o futuro. Muito obrigado e boa sorte.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank
Nós acompanhamos ao vivo de Nova York, nos Estados Unidos, o discurso